A single whisper can shatter a life. For Elise, a waitress in New York's most exclusive restaurant, that whisper came in a language she was never supposed to understand. He was Andrew Finch, a billionaire whose name was a synonym for power, a man who believed the world and everyone in it was for sale. He looked at her simple uniform and tired smile, and saw nothing more than a temporary fixture in his gilded world. Leaning to his associate, he spoke in what he thought was the perfect secret code. But he was wrong. Her reply wouldn't just cost him his pride, it would unravel an empire. The air in Aura, a Michelin-starred sanctuary, nestled in the heart of Manhattan, was thick with the scent of truffle oil, old money, and unspoken ambitions. For most, dining here was a performance. For Elise Ramirez, working here was an act of rebellion. Each night, she donned the crisp black uniform, like a suit of armor. Her hair pulled back in a severe knot, her face a mask of polite professional neutrality. This anonymity was a fortress she had meticulously built over 3 years, brick by painful brick. She moved between the tables with a practiced grace that belied the burning exhaustion in her feet. She could balance 3 plates on one arm, recite the complex notes of a 1982 Bordeaux, and spot a dropped napkin from across the room. Her colleagues saw her as efficient, quiet, and perhaps a little sad. They knew nothing of the world she had escaped, a world where restaurants like Aura were not a workplace, but a backdrop for family dinners that felt more like corporate mergers. Tonight, the energy in the restaurant crackled with a different intensity. Table 7, the most coveted alcove with a panoramic view of the glittering city skyline, was occupied by Andrew Finch. Elise didn't need the hushed whispers from the kitchen or the nervous flutterings of the manager, Mr. Dubois, to know who he was. Finch's face was sharp and severe, carved from ambition and impatience. It stared out from the covers of business magazines and news sites, his empire, Finch Global, a titan of industry that swallowed smaller companies whole. He was dining with another man, older with a soft, pliable face that seemed designed to agree with Andrew Finch. They spoke in low, decisive tones, their conversation a death knell for some unsuspecting corporation. Elise approached the table with the water carafe, her movements fluid and silent. She filled their glasses, her eyes downcast, playing her part. "The wine list," Finch commanded, not looking at her, his voice the dismissive snap of a man accustomed to instant obedience. Elise produced it without a word. He scanned it for a fraction of a second before pointing to a vintage that cost more than her monthly rent. "This one, and bring the wild salmon tartare. Be quick." As she turned to leave, Finch leaned toward his companion, a smirk playing on his lips. Believing he was shielded by the linguistic curtain of a foreign tongue, he murmured a few sentences. He spoke in a dialect she knew intimately, a language that was the soundtrack to her childhood, spoken during lavish family gatherings in Dubai and Riyadh. Though the words were foreign to the bustling New York restaurant to Elise, they were as clear as a bell. Rendered in English, his words were, "Look at the way she walks. All that manufactured grace for a few dollars in tips. She's beautiful. I'll give her that, but there's nothing behind those eyes. I bet we could offer her $10,000 to skip her shift and have a drink with us, and she'd do it without a second thought. These girls are all the same, drowning in debt and desperate for a white knight." His companion chuckled a greasy, sycophantic sound. "For 10,000, Andrew. You could probably get her for 1,000. Elise froze mid-stride, her back to them. The crystal water carafe in her hand suddenly felt immensely heavy. Every muscle in her body went rigid. It wasn't the first time a customer had been dismissive, or crude. But this was different. This was a violation. He had used the language of her past to judge and diminish her present, assuming she was nothing more than what she appeared to be. The fortress of her anonymity was being shelled, and the woman she had tried to bury was clawing her way to the surface. She took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of expensive perfume and seared scallops filling her lungs. Then she turned around. For a moment, Elise simply stood there, letting their laughter wash over her. Andrew Finch didn't even notice her return at first, too engrossed in his own casual cruelty. He finally looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his cold, grey eyes. "Did you forget something, sweetheart?" Elise's expression was unreadable. The meek, subservient waitress was gone, replaced by someone with an unnerving stillness. She placed the water carafe down on a nearby service station, with a soft, deliberate click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence between them. She met Andrew's gaze directly. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, calm, and carried a flawless, aristocratic accent in the very same language he had just used. Translated to English, her words flowed like ice water. "Your assumptions, sir, are as cheap as your conversation. My dignity, however, is not on your menu. And if it were," she added, her eyes narrowing slightly, "you'd find it's one of the few things in this world you couldn't possibly afford." The silence that followed was profound. The blood drained from the face of Finch's companion. His sycophantic smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure terror. He looked at his boss as if waiting for the world to end. Andrew Finch himself looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His jaw, usually set in a line of arrogant certainty, went slack. His eyes, which had held only dismissive boredom moments before, were now wide with disbelief and a dawning, furious humiliation. He had built an empire on reading people, on exploiting their weaknesses, on always being steps ahead. In one sentence, this waitress, this non-entity, had dismantled his omniscience. He had been exposed not just as a cad, but as a fool. The restaurant, with its ambient chatter and clinking cutlery, seemed to fade into the background. Their table became an island of pure distilled tension. "What did you just say?" Andrew whispered, his voice dangerously soft. He had switched back to English, his linguistic shield shattered. "I believe you understood me perfectly," Elise replied. Her voice still level, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She had just detonated a bomb, and had no idea how widespread the fallout would be. Mr. Dubois, the manager, must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere. He scurried over, his face pale with anxiety. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Finch?" Andrew tore his eyes away from Elise to glare at the manager. "Your waitress has a mouth on her, a very surprising mouth." Mr. Dubois turned to Elise, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. "Elise, what happened?" Before Elise could answer, she unclipped the name tag from her uniform and placed it gently on the table next to Finch's untouched bread plate. "I believe my shift is over, Mr. Dubois. Permanently." She looked at Andrew Finch one last time. For a fleeting second, she saw past the fury and saw a flicker of something else, a grudging, bewildered respect. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold fury of a king who had been challenged by a commoner in his own court. Without another word, Elise turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked with a straight back and a steady pace through the labyrinth of tables, past the curious stares of the other diners, past her stunned colleagues. She pushed through the kitchen doors, ignoring the chef's questioning shout, walked to the staff lockers, grabbed her worn coat and backpack, and walked out into the cold New York night, leaving the smoldering remains of her carefully constructed life behind her. She was free, and she was terrified. She had no job, no plan, and she had just made a mortal enemy of one of the most powerful men in the world. The fallout from Elise's departure was immediate and seismic, though confined to the walls of Aura. Andrew Finch, a man whose temper was legendary, did not erupt. He became eerily calm, which was far more terrifying. He cancelled his order, settled the bill for the wine he never drank with a black credit card, and left the restaurant in a chilling silence. His companion scurried after him like a frightened dog. Mr. Dubois was left to stammer apologies to an empty chair. The next morning, in a steel and glass office overlooking Central Park, Andrew Finch was not thinking about the multi-billion-dollar merger he was orchestrating. He was thinking about a waitress named Elise Ramirez. Humiliation was a foreign feeling to him, and it tasted like ash. It wasn't just that she had understood him. It was the way she had dismantled him with poise, intelligence, and a cutting elegance that spoke of a breeding and education that no waitress should possess. He summoned Jeffrey Croft, the head of his personal security and corporate intelligence. Jeffrey was a former MI6 agent, a man who moved through the world like a shadow capable of finding any secret, any person for the right price. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had eyes that missed nothing. "I want to know who she is," Andrew said, his voice flat. He pushed a file across his obsidian desk. It was Elise's employment record from the restaurant which he had acquired with a single threatening phone call to Aura's owner before dawn. Elise Ramirez, age 26, address in Queens, social security number. It's all there. Jeffrey picked up the file. "What am I looking for?" "Everything," Andrew snapped. "I want to know where she was born, who her parents are, where she went to school, what she ate for breakfast yesterday. I want to know why a waitress in a mid-tier restaurant speaks fluent upper-class Arabic. This file says her previous employment was a coffee shop in Chicago. Before that, nothing. A person like that doesn't just appear. Find out what she's hiding." "And when I do?" Jeffrey asked, his face impassive. Andrew leaned back, steepling his fingers. A cold smile touched his lips. "Then we'll decide how to remind her that some people are not to be trifled with." Meanwhile, Elise was experiencing the harsh reality of her impulsive act. Her tiny apartment in Queens suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving a gnawing anxiety in its place. She had less than $2,000 in her bank account. Her carefully constructed anonymity was gone. She scrolled through job listings for waitressing gigs, but her heart wasn't in it. The thought of feigning servitude again made her stomach churn. For 3 years, she had been Elise Ramirez, the quiet girl who kept to herself. But that night at Aura, she had let the mask slip. She had been herself, if only for a moment, the person she was raised to be: sharp, confident, and unafraid of power. That person was Catalina Montero de Vargas, the only daughter and heir to Santiago de Vargas the Titan, behind the Montero Vargas Group, a global conglomerate based in Spain and Mexico, and one of Finch Global's most significant rivals in the telecommunications and energy sectors. She had run away 4 years ago, on the eve of her engagement to a man she despised, a union orchestrated by her father to merge 2 corporate dynasties. She had suffocated under the weight of her name, the expectations, the gilded cage she was born into. She had craved a normal life, a life where her worth wasn't tied to her father's stock price. She had vanished using her mother's maiden name, Ramirez, and a carefully crafted set of documents provided by a loyal family groundskeeper she had known since childhood to build a new identity from scratch. A week passed. The silence was deafening. Elise started applying for office temp jobs, anything that wouldn't put her in the public eye. She avoided her old neighborhood, haunted by the feeling of being watched. Her paranoia was not unfounded. Jeffrey Croft was exceptionally good at his job. But Elise Ramirez was a ghost. The social security number was legitimate, but had only been active for 4 years. The address in Chicago led to an apartment building where no one remembered her. Her university records were sealed, indicating a transfer from an international institution. But the trail went cold at the registrar's office, blocked by a privacy wall that suggested a powerful hand had been at play. Jeffrey reported his findings to Andrew. She's a blank slate. The identity Elise Ramirez was created precisely 4 years ago. There are no family members, no childhood friends, no digital footprint before that time. It's a professional-grade fabrication. Whoever she is, she's not a waitress. This information only deepened Andrew's obsession. This was no longer about a simple insult. It was a puzzle, a mystery that pricked at his ego. Who was she? A corporate spy, an agent for a foreign government, a runaway heiress. "Keep digging," Andrew ordered. "Use every resource, facial recognition against international databases, financial forensics. I don't care what it costs. Find her." Jeffrey's investigation intensified. He ran her grainy employee ID photo through a powerful facial recognition software, cross-referencing it with social media news archives and databases of high-net-worth individuals from around the globe. For days he got nothing. The system churned through millions of faces. And then he got a hit. It wasn't a perfect match, but the probability was 98.6%. The photo was from a society gala in Madrid 5 years earlier. The picture showed a young woman with the same high cheekbones, the same intelligent eyes, the same defiant set to her jaw. She was laughing with the King of Spain. Her name wasn't Elise Ramirez. It was Catalina Monteiro de Vargas. Jeffrey stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across his face. He picked up his phone to call Andrew. The hunter had found his ghost, and the game was about to change entirely. Before Jeffrey Croft placed the call that would change everything he did, one final deep dive. The name Catalina Monteiro de Vargas unlocked a treasure trove of information that had been previously inaccessible. She was the sole heir to Santiago de Vargas, a man whose net worth was comparable to Andrew Finch's, albeit with older, more established European roots. The Monteiro Vargas Group was a sprawling empire of telecommunications, renewable energy, and luxury real estate. Jeffrey read about Catalina's life. A prodigy, educated at Oxford and the Sorbonne, fluent in 5 languages, including Arabic, which she learned through her family's extensive energy dealings in the Gulf states. She was a brilliant equestrian, a skilled negotiator who had sat in on board meetings since she was a teenager, and then 4 years ago, she had vanished. The official story peddled by the family's PR machine was that she had chosen to step away from public life to pursue private philanthropic endeavors. The reality, as Jeffrey's sources in European intelligence circles whispered, was far more dramatic. She had disappeared the week she was meant to announce her engagement to Ricardo Alatorre, the brutish heir to a rival Spanish conglomerate. It was a merger of bloodlines and balance sheets, a deal her father had staked his legacy on. Catalina had refused. The ensuing fight with her father had been titanic, a clash of 2 iron wills. The next morning, she was gone. Jeffrey finally made the call. "I found her," he said, his voice calm. "And you're not going to believe it." When Andrew heard the name, he was silent for a long time. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with dizzying speed. The poise, the intelligence, the flawless, aristocratic Arabic, it all made sense. His waitress wasn't a spy or a grifter. She was a queen in exile. And most significantly, she was the heir to one of his greatest corporate rivals. His initial desire for petty revenge evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating thrill of an unprecedented opportunity. This was a weapon, a key, a lever that could shift the global balance of power in his industry. Humiliation was forgotten. This was now about conquest. Meanwhile, Elise Catalina was fighting a different battle. Her life in Queens was unraveling. She had secured a low-level data entry job at a drab firm in Midtown, a soul-crushing existence of spreadsheets and flickering fluorescent lights. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid the bills. It was the price of her freedom. One evening as she returned to her apartment, a man was waiting for her in the hallway. He wasn't threatening, but his presence was jarring in its stillness. It was Jeffrey Croft. "Elise Ramirez?" he asked, though it wasn't a question. Catalina's heart leaped into her throat. She clutched her keys like a weapon. "Who are you?" "My name is Jeffrey Croft. I work for Andrew Finch," he said calmly. "He would like to speak with you." Ice flowed through her veins. It had happened. The man she had humiliated had found her. She had known this was a risk, but she had underestimated the sheer force of his will. "I have nothing to say to him," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I think you'll want to hear what he has to say," Jeffrey replied, his expression unreadable. "It concerns your father, Santiago de Vargas." The name hit her like a physical blow. Hearing it spoken aloud in this dingy hallway, a place so far removed from the world that name represented, was deeply unsettling. She had worked so hard to separate herself from her father, from his world, from his control. "What about my father?" she asked, her guard still up. "He's ill," Jeffrey said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. "Very ill, and while he is incapacitated, certain factions within your family's company are making a move. Mr. Finch has information that could be very valuable to you. He wants to meet. Tomorrow. His office." He handed her a card with an address and a time, then turned and walked away, leaving Catalina standing in the hallway, her mind reeling. This was a trap. It had to be. Andrew Finch was not a benevolent man. He would use this information to blackmail her, to destroy her, or worse, to destroy her father's company. But what if it was true? She hadn't spoken to her father since the day she left. Their last words had been bitter and angry. Despite their differences, the thought of him being sick and vulnerable, of his life's work being stolen from under him by corporate vultures, filled her with a dreadful filial protectiveness. Who could it be? Her ambitious cousin Matteo had always been resentful of her status as heir. She spent the night pacing her tiny apartment, torn between her instinct for self-preservation and the pull of a life she swore she would never return to. The simple world of Elise Ramirez was a lie, and the complex world of Catalina de Vargas was a prison. But now that prison was under siege, and she might be the only one with the key. By dawn, she had made her decision. She would go to the meeting. She would walk back into the lion's den, not as a waitress, but as the woman she was always meant to be. She would face Andrew Finch, but this time it would be on her own terms. She had no idea that Finch's plan was far more complex and dangerous than simple corporate espionage. He didn't just want to give her information. He wanted to forge an alliance from the ashes of their animosity. The next day, Catalina walked into the lobby of Finch Global. The building was a monument to power, a cold, imposing tower of black glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. As she gave her name to the receptionist, she felt the familiar weight of her old life settle back onto her shoulders. This was a world she knew, a language of intimidation and wealth she understood perfectly. She was escorted to the top floor to Andrew Finch's office. It was a vast, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. Andrew was standing by the window, his back to her. He didn't turn when she entered. "It's a beautiful view," he said, his voice calm and controlled. "From up here, everyone below looks so small, insignificant. It's easy to forget they all have their own stories." He finally turned, his grey eyes locking onto hers. There was no anger in them now, only a chilling, analytical curiosity. "Your story, Mr. Vargas, is more interesting than most." Catalina didn't flinch. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Mr. Finch. You didn't bring me here to discuss my life story. Your man mentioned my father." Andrew gestured to a leather chair opposite his desk. "Please, sit." She remained standing. "I'll stand." A flicker of admiration crossed his face. He nodded slowly and moved to his desk, but he didn't sit either. They stood on opposite sides of the massive desk, two monarchs surveying their battlefield. "Your father Santiago had a major heart attack a week ago." Andrew began, his tone all business. "The board is keeping it quiet, claiming it's a minor health issue. But my sources are impeccable. He's in a medically induced coma in a private hospital in Zurich. The prognosis is not good." Catalina's carefully constructed composure cracked. A wave of nausea and fear washed over her. A coma. Her strong, indomitable father silenced and helpless. "How do you know this?" "My business is information, Mr. Vargas, and your family's business is my business in a manner of speaking," he said. "With your father out of the picture, the board has appointed an interim CEO. Your cousin Matteo." The name confirmed her worst fears. Matteo was charming on the surface, but underneath, he was driven by a deep-seated jealousy and a ruthless ambition. "Matteo is using his new position to orchestrate a leveraged buyout," Andrew continued, watching her reaction intently. "He's been secretly meeting with a consortium of investors, selling them on a vision of the company without the old guard. He's systematically devaluing certain assets to make the company ripe for a hostile takeover. When your father wakes up, if he wakes up, he'll find his empire has been sold out from under him by his own blood." The cold, hard facts of the betrayal were laid bare. Catalina felt a surge of white-hot anger, not just at Matteo, but at herself. While she was hiding in Queens, playing at being a normal person, her family's legacy was being torn apart. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "The Montero Vargas Group is your biggest competitor. You stand to gain more than anyone if it collapses." "A collapse would be messy, unpredictable," Andrew said, leaning forward slightly. "It would destabilize the market. A weakened but intact Montero Vargas, on the other hand, that presents certain opportunities. An alliance, perhaps, a merger down the line. I prefer surgical precision to chaotic explosions." Here it was. The price. The devil's bargain. "You want to help me stop Matteo?" Catalina stated, her mind racing. "And in return, you want a piece of my company." "Not a piece," Andrew corrected her smoothly. "A partnership. You are the majority shareholder, the rightful heir. But you have been gone for 4 years. You have no allies on the board, no current knowledge of the company's inner workings. Matteo has consolidated power. On your own, you will fail. With my resources, my legal team, my financial analysts, my intelligence network, you can walk back into that boardroom and take back what is yours. He let the offer hang in the air between them. It was audacious, insulting, and brilliant. He was offering her the very power she had run away from, using her family as both the bait and the prize. To save her father, she would have to become him. And she would have to align herself with his greatest enemy. "And what makes you think you can trust me?" Catalina challenged. "What's to stop me from using your resources to save my company and then telling you to get lost?" Andrew smiled, a true predatory smile this time. "Because I've seen who you are. You're not just a runaway heiress playing waitress. You're a fighter. You have your father's fire. But more importantly, you have your own code of honor. You will keep your word. Besides," he added, his voice dropping, "it makes for a much better story. The waitress who humbled a billionaire only to team up with him to save her kingdom. It's almost poetic." Catalina stared at him, the man she had despised just days ago. He was arrogant, ruthless, and manipulative. But he was also offering her the only lifeline she had. Her life as Elise Ramirez was over. The charade was done. It was time to go home. "I have conditions," she said, her voice firm. The voice of a CEO, not a waitress. Andrew's smile widened. "I would expect nothing less." The alliance between Catalina de Vargas and Andrew Finch was forged in the cold fire of mutual interest. Within hours, Catalina was no longer in her queen's apartment, but in a suite at the Four Seasons, which had been converted into a war room. A team of Finch's top lawyers, financial strategists, and Jeffrey Croft himself were at her disposal. For 2 days they worked relentlessly. Catalina shedding the last vestiges of Elise Ramirez, transformed. She absorbed complex financial data, analyzed shareholder reports, and mapped out the network of loyalties and betrayals on the Montero Vargas board. The knowledge and instincts she had suppressed for 4 years came roaring back. Andrew was a constant presence sometimes in the room, a silent observing force, and sometimes on video conference directing his global assets to aid her cause. He was impressed. She wasn't just her father's daughter. She was a formidable strategist in her own right. She was sharp, decisive, and utterly relentless. The respect he felt was no longer grudging. It was genuine. Their plan was twofold. First, they needed to freeze Matteo's movements. Andrew's legal team found a loophole in the company's bylaws regarding interim leadership during a medical incapacitation, allowing Catalina as majority shareholder to call for an emergency board meeting to ratify or reject Matteo's appointment. The meeting was set for 2 days later at the company's global headquarters in Madrid. Second, they needed leverage. Jeffrey Croft's team worked their dark magic, digging into the consortium of investors Matteo was courting. They discovered a trail of illicit dealings and financial irregularities that, if exposed, would not only scuttle the takeover, but could lead to criminal investigations. Catalina also made a call of her own to the one person in her old life she knew she could trust, her father's longtime chief of staff, a stern but fiercely loyal man named Alvaro. She explained the situation. Alvaro, who had been sidelined by Matteo, was overjoyed to hear from her. He became her eyes and ears inside the company, feeding her crucial information about Matteo's frantic attempts to solidify his power before the board meeting. 24 hours later, Catalina was on Andrew Finch's private jet, soaring across the Atlantic. The transition was dizzying. Less than a week ago, she was serving overpriced cocktails. Now she was preparing to dismantle a corporate coup. Andrew sat across from her, reviewing a document. "Nervous?" he asked, not looking up. "No," she replied honestly. "I'm angry, and I'm ready." He finally looked at her, his grey eyes holding an unreadable expression. "When I first saw you at the restaurant, I saw exactly what I expected to see. A stereotype. It was a failure of imagination on my part." "You saw what I wanted you to see," she corrected him. "It was my armor." "Your reply," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "It was magnificent. You were magnificent." It was the closest he had ever come to an apology, and in their strange high-stakes world, it was enough. A fragile, unspoken truce settled between them. They landed in Madrid and were swept into a convoy of black cars. Catalina, dressed in a sharp, dark blue power suit that Alvaro had arranged for her, looked every bit the corporate royalty she was. She was no longer hiding. The headquarters of the Montero Vargas Group was a place she knew better than any other. As she walked through the marble lobby, employees who had known her since she was a child stared, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. The ghost had returned. Whispers followed her down the hall like a wave. The boardroom was tense. Mateo was at the head of the table in her father's chair, looking smug and confident. When Catalina walked in, his face turned to stone. The other board members, a collection of old, powerful men and women, gasped. "Catalina," Mateo stammered, recovering quickly. "What a surprise. We were told you were traveling." "I was," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. She didn't take a seat. Instead, she stood at the opposite end of the table, creating a clear line of opposition. "But I heard there was some spring cleaning being done in my absence. I came back to make sure nothing valuable was thrown out. Like, for instance, my father's legacy." The battle had begun. The boardroom became a battlefield of words and wills. Mateo, flanked by his lawyers, tried to control the narrative. He painted Catalina as an irresponsible runaway who had abandoned her duty, claiming he was stepping in only to protect the company from her dereliction. "You have no right to be here," he snarled, his composure fraying. "You forfeited your place at this table 4 years ago. My place is dictated by my shares, Mateo, not by your ambition." Catalina retorted, her voice cold as steel. She projected a market analysis onto the main screen, one prepared by Finch's team. "In the 10 days you have been as an interim CEO, you have initiated the sale of 3 of our most promising renewable energy assets at a significant undervalue. Was this incompetence, or was it a deliberate attempt to make the company a more digestible meal for your takeover partners?" She named the investors in his secret consortium. She detailed their shady financial histories. She laid out his entire plan, piece by piece, with irrefutable evidence provided by Andrew's intelligence network. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their loyalty to Mateo visibly crumbling. Mateo was cornered. "These are lies, fabrications from a desperate woman trying to seize power." "Is this a fabrication?" Catalina asked. She played an audio recording. It was Mateo speaking with the lead investor, explicitly discussing his plan to oust Santiago permanently and sell controlling interest to the consortium. The voice was unmistakable. The betrayal was absolute. Alvaro had planted the recording device. The room erupted. Mateo was finished. The board, seeing the tide turn, so decisively moved to save themselves. A motion was put forward to formally remove Matteo from his interim position and to install Catalina as acting CEO until her father recovered. It passed unanimously. Security was called to escort a defeated and humiliated Matteo from the building. As he passed Catalina, his eyes burned with hatred. "You'll regret this. You and your new friend, Finch. He will own you." "The difference between you and him, Matteo," Catalina said softly, "is that he never pretended to be my family." With the coup thwarted, Catalina assumed control. The next few weeks were a blur of 18-hour days. She worked tirelessly to undo the damage Matteo had caused, to reassure investors, and to rally the employees. She proved to be a natural leader, combining her father's ruthless business acumen with a modern, more empathetic approach. Andrew Finch remained in the background, a silent partner, as promised. He provided support when asked, but made no demands. His respect for her had grown into something more complex, something that bordered on fascination. A month later, Catalina was in Zurich, sitting by her father's bedside. Santiago de Vargas had woken from his coma 2 days earlier. He was weak, but his mind was sharp. She had told him everything about her life, as Elise about Matteo's betrayal, and about her unlikely alliance with Andrew Finch. He listened without interruption, his eyes so much like her own, filled with a storm of emotions. When she finished, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was frail. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I tried to force you into a life that would serve my legacy. I almost destroyed you, and in the end, you were the one who saved it. And you did it on your own terms. I am proud of you, my daughter. More proud than I have ever been." Tears streamed down Catalina's face. It was the validation, the acceptance she had craved her entire life. The chasm between them was finally bridged. A week later, she was back in New York. She had agreed to meet Andrew at Aura, the restaurant where it had all begun. When she walked in, Mr. Dubois nearly fainted. She was shown to the same table 7. Andrew was already there. He stood as she approached. "Miss de Vargas," he said, a genuine smile on his face. "Mr. Finch," she replied, matching his smile. They sat down, no longer a billionaire and a waitress, but 2 equals, 2 titans. "I hear your father is recovering well," he said. "He is. He wants to meet you. He said any man smart enough to recognize my talent and ally with it, instead of fighting it, is a man he wants to know." "I'll look forward to that," Andrew said. He looked around the restaurant. "It's strange being back here." "Is it?" Catalina asked, raising an eyebrow. She leaned forward conspiratorially and whispered in that same perfect aristocratic accent from that fateful night. "Just be careful what you say. You never know who might be listening." Andrew Finch threw his head back and laughed, a real unrestrained sound of pure amusement. The sound of a man who had finally and happily met his match. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 months had passed since Catalina de Vargas had walked back into the boardroom and reclaimed her empire. The corporate world, which had a notoriously short memory, was utterly captivated by her story. The media had dubbed her the Lioness of Madrid, and business magazines that once featured Andrew Finch's steely gaze now splashed her image across their covers. She was no longer a ghost or a waitress. She was a phenomenon. Life was a whirlwind of board meetings, market analyses, and strategic planning. She and her father, Santiago, now recovering his strength, worked in tandem. He provided the wisdom of his long reign, and she brought a fresh, audacious perspective that invigorated the company. The wound of their past conflict was healing, replaced by a deep mutual respect. Yet a shadow lingered at the edge of this new peace, a shadow cast by the towering figure of Andrew Finch. The alliance that had saved her company was now a source of quiet tension. In the corporate world, there are no permanent friends, only permanent interests. Their partnership existed in an undefined space. There were no contracts, no official ties, only the memory of a shared battle and an unspoken understanding. For Catalina, it was a debt of honor. For her father, it was a ticking bomb. "He's a shark, Catalina," Santiago would say during their late-night strategy sessions in his study, "and sharks are always circling. He helped you, yes, but only because a stable Montero Vargas, indebted to him, is more valuable than a collapsed one. Do not mistake a calculated investment for friendship." Catalina understood his caution. It was the same ruthless logic he had taught her. But she had seen a different side of Andrew Finch. In the war room, she had witnessed not just his cunning, but his brilliance. Their minds had worked in a rare, thrilling synchronicity. There was a connection there, a spark of intellectual electricity that she couldn't dismiss as mere strategy. Then the test came. Andrew Finch formally proposed a joint venture. It was a multi-billion-dollar project to develop a revolutionary solar energy grid across South America, a venture that would dominate the renewable energy market for the next 50 years. On paper, it was a masterstroke, a perfect synergy of Finch Global's aggressive innovation and Montero Vargas's established infrastructure and political connections in the region. It was a deal that could redefine both their legacies. It was also Santiago's worst nightmare. "This is his move," her father declared, slamming a file onto the polished mahogany of the boardroom table. The emergency meeting included only Catalina Santiago and their most trusted senior advisors. "He wants to entangle our core assets with his. Once we are locked in, he will bleed us dry from the inside. He will make us dependent on his technology, his capital, and then when the time is right, he will absorb us. I have seen him do it a dozen times." "This is different," Catalina argued, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "Our renewable energy division is my primary focus. I would be overseeing the project directly. He would not be able to make a move without my knowledge." "He will manipulate you," another board member, a loyalist of her father's, chimed in. "He has a reputation for a reason." Catalina felt a surge of frustration. They still saw her as the girl who ran away, not the woman who returned and saved them all. They saw Andrew as a caricature, the corporate raider from the headlines, not the complex man she had strategized with until dawn. "My reputation was non-existent 3 months ago." Catalina countered, her gaze sweeping across the room. "And his reputation didn't stop us from accepting his help when Mateo had his knife to the company's throat. Andrew Finch understands one thing above all else: power. A partnership of equals offers more power and stability than a hostile takeover. This project makes us equals. Rejecting it makes us look weak, afraid, and ungrateful." Her impassioned defense silenced the room. Even her father looked at her with a flicker of grudging admiration. She had his fire, but it was now tempered with a diplomacy he often lacked. "The board will not approve it without your father's explicit endorsement, Alvaro," her father's chief of staff said quietly, "and he will not give it." Catalina knew he was right. She was caught between honoring the man who had given her everything and trusting the man who had helped her take it all back. She needed to look Andrew Finch in the eye and ask the question her father could not. Was this a partnership, or was this a conquest? That evening, she sent a one-line encrypted message to Andrew's private number, the one she still had from their war room days. "We need to talk. Face to face. No lawyers, no advisors. Just you and me." His reply came in under a minute. "Name the place." She chose a small private art gallery in Geneva, a neutral ground of quiet and beauty. As she boarded the jet, she knew this meeting would decide everything: the future of her company, the nature of their alliance, and the truth behind the motives of the billionaire who had changed her life with a single careless whisper. The gallery was a quiet sanctuary of polished concrete floors and soaring white walls. The collection was modern, featuring stark emotional sculptures that seemed to hold their breath in the silent, curated space. Catalina found Andrew standing before a massive canvas of chaotic interwoven black and white lines, a piece that seemed to perfectly capture the complexity of their situation. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and trousers, stripped of his corporate armor, and looked more like a brooding academic than a ruthless tycoon. "Chaos theory," he said, not turning as she approached. "The artist believes that within every seemingly random system there are underlying patterns, interconnectedness that is invisible to the naked eye. I find that comforting. And I find it dangerous," Catalina replied, stopping beside him. "It implies a lack of control." He finally turned to face her. The analytical glint in his eyes was softer here, replaced by a genuine curiosity. "And control is everything to you, isn't it?" "It is to you too," she countered. "Which is why my father and my board believe your joint venture proposal is simply your next move in a long game of chess. They think you are trying to get a checkmate against my company." She watched him carefully, searching for any flicker of deception, any hint of the predator her father saw. Andrew didn't deny it or offer a slick rebuttal. He simply held her gaze. "When my father died, he left me a company on the brink of collapse and a letter. The letter had one sentence in it: trust no one and never show weakness. For 20 years I've lived by that creed. I've taken over companies because it was safer than partnering with them. I've destroyed rivals because weakness is an invitation for betrayal. It's a lonely way to build an empire, but it's safe." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "And then I met you. You weren't a rival to be conquered. You weren't a target. You were an anomaly. You showed incredible strength by embracing what my father would have called a weakness, walking away from a life you didn't want, then fighting for it when it mattered. My initial motive for helping you was opportunistic. I won't lie about that. But it changed. Working with you. It was the first time in a very long time I felt I wasn't playing the game alone." His confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. He was showing her a vulnerability he had likely never shown another soul. He was breaking his father's rule. "This venture," he continued, his voice intense, "is not about conquering your company, Catalina. It's about building something with you. It's the first move in a game I'd rather play with a queen by my side than against one." A profound silence enveloped them. Catalina felt the last of her defenses begin to crumble. She believed him. Before she could voice her acceptance, his phone held in his hand buzzed with a frantic, insistent vibration. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing in annoyance, but the message on the screen made his face harden instantly. "It's Jeffrey," he said, his tone shifting back to the ice-cold commander she remembered. He answered the call, putting it on speaker. Jeffrey Croft's voice was clipped and urgent. "Sir, we have a problem. A major one. The Montero Vargas group is under attack." Catalina's blood ran cold. What? What attack? It's financial and informational warfare, Jeffrey explained rapidly. In the last hour, 3 major news outlets have published scathing articles alleging safety violations at your lithium mining subsidiary in Chile. Simultaneously, a coordinated short-selling attack has been launched against your stock, driving the price down by 12% already. The regulatory agencies in Chile have just announced a surprise, full-scale investigation based on an anonymous tip. This is a professional hit designed to cripple you. Matteo. Catalina breathed, her fists clenching. We thought so at first, Jeffrey said. But the money trail is too sophisticated for him alone. He's a blunt instrument. This is surgical. We dug into the offshore entities, funding the short sellers and the PR firms planting the stories. We peeled back 6 layers of shell corporations and found a name. There was a slight pause. Riccardo Alatorre. The name struck Catalina like a physical blow. Riccardo Alatorre. The arrogant, cruel heir she had been engaged to. The very symbol of the gilded cage she had fled. The reason she had become Elise Ramirez in the first place. He was the ghost she thought she had left behind forever. Riccardo is a spoiled child. He doesn't have the strategic mind for something this complex. Catalina said, her mind reeling. He doesn't. Jeffrey confirmed, his voice grim. But he has the money and the motive. And he has a new senior advisor who has been guiding him. Someone who knows your company's pressure points intimately. We confirmed it half an hour ago. It's Matteo. The final piece clicked into place. The 2 men who represented her past the cousin who betrayed her and the fiancé she scorned had joined forces. Their goal wasn't just corporate raiding. It was a deeply personal vendetta. They wanted to burn her kingdom to the ground and dance on the ashes. The art gallery, once a symbol of peace and understanding, now felt like the calm before a hurricane. The abstract painting of chaos suddenly looked like a premonition. Catalina looked at Andrew. The brief vulnerability in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, protective fury she had never seen before. He ended the call with Jeffrey and turned to her, his focus absolute. They aren't just attacking your company, Catalina. They are attacking you. They are trying to finish what they started, he said, his voice low and dangerous. My father taught me to never show weakness, but he also taught me to annihilate any threat to my assets. And right now, you are the most valuable asset in this room. He stepped into her space, his presence a shield against the incoming storm. Our joint venture is no longer a topic for debate. It's our new war room. You asked me if you could trust me. Don't listen to my words. Watch my actions. We are going to destroy them. Together. The business alliance had been transactional. The truce had been fragile. But in that moment, facing the combined malice of their enemies, it was forged into something far stronger. It was a pact sealed not by a handshake, but by the promise of a shared war against the ghosts of her past. That single whisper in a language he thought was a secret didn't just expose a billionaire's arrogance. It unleashed a hidden queen and rewrote the destinies of 2 global empires. Catalina de Vargas, hiding as the waitress Elise, proved that true power isn't about the money you have, but the strength of character you possess when you have nothing. Her journey from a quiet life of anonymity back to the throne she never wanted is a powerful reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover. The person serving your coffee could be a struggling artist, a brilliant scientist, or even a runaway heiress waiting for the right moment to reclaim her kingdom. If this story of hidden identity, shocking twists and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a great drama, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories that uncover the extraordinary in the ordinary. Let us know in the comments what you think. Could you have walked away like Elise, or would you have fought back from the start? Thanks for listening.